The silence that descended over house number 143 on Acacia Street in the Jardim Shangri-La neighborhood in Londrina, Paraná, in March 2006, hid for 15 years one of the city's darkest secrets. Márcia Rodrigues, a 32-year-old nurse at the university hospital, had disappeared without a trace on a rainy Tuesday night, but it was only when the new owners decided to renovate the neighboring house that the truth finally came to light. If you want to discover how a simple renovation revealed evidence the police had been searching for over a decade, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. This is a story that will leave you breathless until the very last minute. Márcia Rodrigues was a woman who left her mark wherever she went, standing 1.7 meters tall, with natural blonde hair always tied up in a professional bun and blue eyes that conveyed serenity to even the most nervous patients. She was respected and loved by everyone at the University Hospital of Londrina. Born and raised in the city, daughter of Benedito Santos, a retired mechanic, and Celia Maria Rodrigues Santos, a seamstress, Márcia had graduated in nursing from the State University of Londrina 5 years before her disappearance. She worked the night shift in the emergency department from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., a schedule she chose because it paid extra for night work and allowed her to study during the day. Márcia was specializing in intensive care nursing and dreamed of working in the ICU of the hospital. Her supervisors described her as an exemplary professional, always punctual, extremely competent in emergency situations, and with a unique ability to calm patients in moments of despair. She had a special gift, recalls Dr. Regina Almeida Costa, who was head of the emergency department at the time. Márcia could make an anxious elderly patient calm down just with her presence. It was as if she transmitted an energy of peace. Patients asked for her by name. They wanted her to be the one to administer their medications. In her personal life, Márcia lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment downtown Londrina in the Santa Clara building, which she had bought with the help of her parents 2 years earlier. She was an independent and determined woman who loved reading crime novels in her spare time and taking care of her plants on the apartment balcony. On weekends, she visited her parents in the neighborhood where she grew up and attended the Central Baptist Church, where she sang in the choir. She had been dating Eduardo Silva Oliveira, a 35-year-old civil engineer, for 8 months. They had met at a mutual friend's wedding. Eduardo worked for a major construction company in the city, and the two planned to live together after their wedding, which was set for December 2006. Márcia was an incredible woman, Eduardo recalls, still emotional after all these years. She was strong, independent, but at the same time affectionate and caring. We had plans to start a family. She wanted 3 children. Márcia's routine was very structured. She woke up at 2 p.m., had lunch, studied until 6 p.m., had dinner, and got ready for work. She always arrived at the hospital at 9:30 p.m., half an hour before her shift began, to exchange information with the day team. After work, she would stop at the 24-hour supermarket to pick up a few things, arrive home around 7 a.m., and sleep until 2 p.m. On Tuesday, March 28, 2006, Márcia followed her routine normally, up to a certain point. Her colleagues at the hospital confirmed that she had worked as usual throughout the night shift. The head nurse on duty, Simone Fernandez Lima, remembers that Márcia attended to 3 emergencies that night: a traffic accident at 11:15 p.m., a child with an asthma attack around midnight, and an elderly man with a heart attack at 4:50 a.m. She was normal that night, recalls Simone. We talked during the 3 a.m. break about her wedding plans. Márcia was excited. She had just chosen the venue for the party. There was nothing unusual in her behavior, no sign of worry or fear. The shift ended at 6 a.m. as always. Márcia said goodbye to her colleagues in the hospital parking lot, got into her white Volkswagen Gol, registered in Londrina, and left the hospital at 6:15 p.m. This was the last time anyone saw her alive. What should have been a 15-minute drive home turned into a mystery that would haunt Londrina for the next 15 years. Márcia never arrived at her apartment. Her car was never found. She simply vanished, as if swallowed by the earth. The first person to notice something was wrong was Eduardo. The couple had the habit of talking on the phone every day when Márcia arrived home from work. That morning, he called her at 7:30, as he always did, but the phone rang into emptiness. Worried, he tried again at 8, at 9, at 10. Nothing. At 11 a.m., Eduardo decided to go to Márcia's apartment. He had a spare key she had given him months earlier. When he opened the door, he found everything exactly as she had left it the night before. The bed neatly made, clothes set aside for the next day, and the breakfast that Márcia always prepared before sleeping still untouched on the kitchen table. That's when despair took over Eduardo. He immediately called the hospital, where he learned that Márcia had left as usual after her shift. He called her parents, who said they hadn't received any calls from their daughter. At 12:30 p.m., 14 hours after Márcia had last been seen, Eduardo contacted the military police. The case was immediately transferred to the civil police, and Detective Rogerio Marrero Santos took charge of the investigation. The first step was to retrace the route Márcia took from the hospital to her home. Security cameras from some local businesses were analyzed, but the footage was low quality and did not show Márcia's car passing the usual checkpoints along her route. An intense search was launched. Márcia's car was entered into the national database of wanted vehicles. Hospitals, clinics, and morgues throughout the region were contacted. Posters with her photo were spread all over Londrina and neighboring cities. The family offered a reward of 10,000 reais for information leading to Márcia's whereabouts. The initial investigation focused on 3 main lines. The first was the possibility of an accident. Perhaps Márcia had suffered a car accident on some secondary road, and her vehicle had fallen into a river or remained hidden in vegetation. Firefighters and volunteers scoured rural roads within a 50-kilometer radius of Londrina. The second line of investigation considered the possibility of kidnapping. Márcia was a young, beautiful woman who apparently had a stable financial life. Maybe someone had kidnapped her upon leaving the hospital or on her way home. But no ransom request was ever made, and analysis of Márcia's and her family's finances did not indicate sufficient resources to justify a kidnapping. The third, more delicate possibility involved investigating Márcia's personal life. Eduardo was extensively interrogated but had a solid alibi. He had been working at a construction site since 5 a.m. that day, with dozens of witnesses. Police also looked into whether Márcia had other relationships or enemies, but nothing was found. For months, the investigation continued intensely. More than 200 people were interviewed. Ex-boyfriends, co-workers, patients and patients' relatives she had treated, neighbors, shopkeepers in the area where she lived, all were thoroughly investigated. No concrete lead emerged. The first year after the disappearance was devastating for the family. Benedito Santos developed heart problems that doctors attributed to extreme stress. Celia Maria stopped eating properly and lost 15 kilograms in 6 months. Eduardo tried to keep hope alive, but the total absence of clues began to corrode his mental health. It was like living in limbo, Eduardo describes. Every day I woke up thinking maybe that would be the day she came back home, or that the police would find a lead. But the days passed, turned into months, and nothing happened. The worst part was not knowing if she was dead, if she was being held captive, or if she had run away for some reason I couldn't understand. In 2007, 1 year after the disappearance, the first false sightings appeared. A woman in Maringá claimed to have seen Márcia working in a pharmacy. Another person said they had spotted her in a shopping mall in Curitiba. All reports were investigated and proven to be mistakes. Each false alarm renewed the family's hope and then crushed it again. Police also received several anonymous tips. Someone called saying Márcia was buried on a farm in the Cambé region. Another claimed she had been murdered by traffickers and her body was thrown into Lake Igapo. All tips were investigated, but none led to concrete discoveries. In 2008, 2 years after the disappearance, the case practically disappeared from the headlines of local newspapers. New crimes captured the attention of the media and police. The investigation officially remained open, but with far fewer resources allocated. The family hired a private detective, but even this professional was unable to find leads the police had missed. Eduardo tried to rebuild his life. In 2009, 3 years after losing Márcia, he moved to São Paulo, where he got a job at a large construction company. "I couldn't live in Londrina anymore," he explains. "Every street, every corner reminded me of her. I would see blonde women on the street and my heart would race, thinking it could be her." Márcia's parents never lost hope. Benedito Santos continued doing his own searches on weekends, traveling rural roads and talking to residents of small towns in the region. Celia kept Márcia's bedroom exactly as she had left it, with clothes in the closet and beauty products in the bathroom, as if she might return at any moment. In the following years, Márcia's case became one of Londrina's great unsolved mysteries. Criminology students at the local university sometimes chose her disappearance as the subject of academic papers. TV programs about unsolved crimes occasionally featured the case, briefly renewing public interest but never generating useful leads. In 2015, 9 years after the disappearance, Benedito Santos died of heart failure at the age of 68. Family friends say he died of a broken heart, never having recovered from the loss of his daughter. Celia, now widowed and in poor health, went to live with a sister in Apucarana. The case seemed destined to remain forever unsolved. The investigation files gathered dust at the police station. Márcia Santos Rodrigues' name was listed in the National Missing Persons System, but few still actively remembered to look for her. But sometimes fate works in mysterious ways, and the truth about Márcia's fate was about to come to light in the most unexpected way. In February 2021, 15 years after Márcia's disappearance, a young couple from São Paulo, Anderson Lima Nascimento and Patricia Soares Cunha, bought a house in the Jardim Shangri-La neighborhood of Londrina. Anderson had gotten a job as a manager at a technology company that was expanding into Paraná, and the couple decided to leave São Paulo's rush to try a quieter life in the country. The house they bought on Acacias Street was old, built in the 1990s and needed significant renovations. They hired civil engineer Ricardo Ferreira Alves and a team of construction workers to completely modernize the property. The work began in March 2021, exactly 15 years after Márcia's disappearance. During the renovation, they decided to expand the garage and build a leisure area at the back of the house. For this, they needed to excavate part of the backyard, which was covered by an old vegetable garden abandoned by the previous owners. That was when one of the workers' shovels hit something that shouldn't have been there. On the morning of April 23, 2021, construction worker João Carlos Mendes was digging the foundations for the new area when his shovel struck something hard, buried about 1 meter deep. At first, he thought it was a large stone or some debris left from previous construction, but as he started digging around it to remove the object, he realized it was something much larger than they had imagined. The black plastic sheeting was deteriorated in some places, but still protected its contents. And when Ricardo managed to make a small opening in the plastic, what he saw made his blood run cold. They were human bones. Clearly, someone had been buried in that backyard many years ago. Ricardo immediately called the military police, who secured the area and notified the civil police. Detective Marco Santos Lima, now responsible for homicide cases in the city, arrived at the scene in less than an hour, accompanied by a forensic team. The excavation was carried out with extreme care by criminal experts. What they found was a complete human skeleton, clearly of a young woman, buried in a fetal position and wrapped in several layers of black plastic sheeting. Along with the bones, objects were found that would dramatically shift the investigation. There were fragments of a light green hospital uniform, the exact type worn by nurses at the University Hospital of Londrina. There were also remains of professional white shoes, and most importantly, a small gold chain with a heart-shaped pendant engraved with the initials MSR. But the most shocking discovery was next to the body: the keys to a Volkswagen Gol and a laminated driver's license, which, despite the years buried, still allowed the name Márcia Santos Rodrigues to be read. The news of the discovery spread through the city like wildfire. After 15 years, the mystery of the disappearance of Márcia Santos Rodrigues had finally been solved, but in a way no one could ever have imagined. She had not run away. She had not been kidnapped and taken far away. She had not suffered an accident on a distant road. Márcia had been murdered and buried less than 2 kilometers from the hospital where she worked. The investigation was immediately reopened with full force. The first step was to officially confirm that the remains found really belonged to Márcia. DNA tests were carried out, comparing the genetic material from the bones with samples from Celia Maria, Márcia's mother, who was still alive. The result confirmed it without a shadow of a doubt. They were the mortal remains of Márcia Santos Rodrigues. Forensic analysis revealed disturbing details about the circumstances of her death. The skeleton showed signs of blunt trauma to the skull, indicating that Márcia had suffered at least 2 violent blows to the head. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was cranial trauma resulting from assault. But the discovery that would completely change the course of the investigation came from the analysis of the property where the body was found. The house on Acacia Street had belonged in 2006 to Valdir Santos Pereira, a 45-year-old radiology technician who worked at the same university hospital where Márcia was a nurse. Records showed that Valdir had sold the house in September 2006, just 6 months after Márcia's disappearance, and had moved to Rio Grande do Sul. At the time, no one had made the connection between him and the nurse's disappearance, since Valdir worked in a different department of the hospital and apparently had no close relationship with Márcia. When the police managed to locate Valdir, now 60 years old and living in Porto Alegre, where he worked at a private clinic, they discovered he had built a new identity over the years. Married with 2 children, he was considered an exemplary citizen in the community where he lived. But when he was confronted with the evidence of the body discovered on his former property, Valdir's facade completely collapsed. After 10 hours of interrogation, he finally confessed to the crime he had hidden for 15 years. Valdir revealed that he had developed a sick obsession with Márcia since he started working at the hospital. He watched her during shifts, knew her schedule, was aware of her routine. He had tried to approach her several times, but Márcia always maintained a strictly professional and polite relationship. On the morning of March 28, 2006, Valdir was leaving his night shift when he saw Márcia heading to the parking lot. He followed her, and when she reached her car, he tried to approach her and asked her to go out with him. When Márcia firmly rejected his advances and said she would call security if he kept bothering her, Valdir completely lost control. He attacked her in the hospital parking lot, banging her head against her own car. Márcia lost consciousness, and Valdir, desperate with what he had done, put her in the trunk of the Gol and drove to his house. There, he realized she had died during the trip. In panic, Valdir spent the rest of the day digging a grave in his backyard. He buried Márcia along with her purse, documents, and car keys. The Volkswagen Gol was dismantled by him over several weeks, with the parts being sold separately or discarded in junkyards in distant towns. For 15 years, Valdir lived with the weight of the crime, moving far away and trying to rebuild his life. He never imagined that a simple renovation would reveal his terrible secret. Valdir's confession finally brought the closure that Márcia's family had sought for a decade and a half. Celia Maria, now 79 years old, was finally able to grieve her daughter properly and give her a dignified burial. Eduardo, who had rebuilt his life in Sao Paulo, returned to Londrina for the funeral. Valdir Santos Pereira was sentenced to 22 years in prison for qualified homicide and concealment of a corpse. During the trial, he showed remorse for his actions, but that did not lessen the gravity of the crime he had committed or the decades of suffering he had caused Márcia's family. The case of Márcia Santos Rodrigues became a milestone in the criminal history of Londrina, not only for the brutality of the crime, but also for the persistence of the family who never gave up seeking answers. It also showed how seemingly perfect crimes can be uncovered by the whims of fate even decades later. The house on Acacia Street was later sold again by the couple from Sao Paulo who could not continue living there after the macabre discovery. Today, a plaque at the entrance of the University Hospital of Londrina honors the memory of Márcia Santos Rodrigues, remembering her dedication as a nurse and her life tragically cut short. The mystery that haunted a city for 15 years was finally resolved, but the scars left by the loss of Márcia will never be completely healed. Her story reminds us that justice, although sometimes delayed, can prevail in unexpected ways, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to come to light.